Hall denied bond in aged man's death. September the 23rd, 1948. John Frasure dies September the 16th after beating. Children say Hall held them prisoner after hitting father. After he had heard the children of John Frasure, 79-year-old Craner man, tell in detail how he was fatally beaten and kicked Tuesday morning of last week by Bert T. Hall, Bertee. I don't know how you pronounce it. I'm guessing it's Bertie. County Judge Alex L. Davidson quickly directed Monday that Hall be held in jail here on a charge of murder without bail. The death of Frasure testimony at the examining trial showed the following: a series of altercations between Frasure, who was a former postmaster and merchant at Craner, and Hall, an ex-convict, over Hall's attention to Frasure's 16-year-old daughter, Rosina. Hall's defense hinged on a slight wound in the back, it was indicated, which was inflicted by Frasure with a case knife. So they're saying Frasure stabbed him in the back with a case knife. That's what Bertie Hall, is claiming. But the defendant himself did not testify, nor did he offer testimony of any other witnesses in his behalf. Frasure died at the Beaver Valley Hospital in Martin last Thursday of chest and head injuries. Chest injuries he suffered would have produced death, testified G. D. Ryan, Martin funeral director, who assisted in preparing the body for burial. The aged man, described as very feeble, was taken to the hospital late Thursday after it was testified Hall had kept Frasure's children prisoners inside the home throughout the day, allegedly fearing they would tell of his attack on Frasure. Deputy Sheriffs Harold Kahn, Hillard Mitchell, Ep Lafferty, and Levy Rice testified Hall at the Frasure home Friday. Deputy Sheriff Mitchell said that when he first saw Hall inside the home, the alleged slayer had opened an old trunk and had in his hand a stack of deeds and old papers belonging to the victim. These were brought here. Relatives described feeling against Hall as high and said possible violence was prevented by their pleas to let the law take its course. Testifying at the preliminary hearing here Monday, 16-year-old Rosina Frasure, a pretty brunette, was in tears as she told the story of the fight between the two men. Dad didn't want Bertie to go with me, she said. In other words, go steady. We, Bertie and me, and the children were at the stove in the kitchen, and Dad got out of bed and came in. He had a case knife in his hand. The handle was broke off of it. He punched Bertie one time. Bertie raised and grabbed him by the hair. I saw Bertie hit him with a chair and kick him twice. The girl said she did not see all that happened because she fled the room after the altercation. Bertie slapped me and said, "Dry your mouth," quote unquote. This bit of testimony was elicited when County Attorney W. W. Burchett asked her how her eye was blackened. Daddy lay there about 30 minutes, she added. James and Truman, her brothers, got him up. Bertie kept us in the house all day. He was afraid we would get out and tell the neighbors. On cross-examination by B.M. James for the defense, she denied that she had thrown a jar of mayonnaise at her father. To the defense question if the aged man did not fall against the kitchen safe, she replied that he was not against it. Asked by County Attorney Burchett about a hammer with which the aged man said he was struck, the girl said she did not see it. The hammer, she said, was kept on top of the safe. It was found by officers inside a phonograph. She was asked if she knew who washed blood off the hammer, and she denied such knowledge. Her brother James, 13 years old, corroborated her story, except that he denied seeing a knife in his father's possession. He said his father and Hall had had 2 or 3 rackets, in other words, arguments, fights, a week or 2 before last week's encounter, the two quarreling over Bertie coming to see Rosina. He said Hall had told his 9-year-old brother Truman to throw rocks at their father. On cross-examination, he testified Rosina called to Hall, "Watch, he's got a knife." The cut in Hall's back he described as a little place. Hall had chased Frasure from the home in previous altercations, he testified. Truman, with his childish lisp, attracted the spectators' interest during his testimony. He said he saw no knife. He referred to his father as John. John, he said, started to raise up off the floor, and Bertie told him to lay back down, and then Bertie kicked him in the face. One time Bertie throwed an apple butter jug as John and bursted it against the wall. He also told of Hall trying to get him to go after a rope. He said he wanted to tie John up and make him tell where he got the knife, the boy testified. The 6-year-old Robert told of seeing Hall kick his father twice. Miss B. F. Elliott of Harold, a half-sister of the victim, testified that the injured man, while at times at Martin Hospital, told of Hall hitting him with a hammer. She said he had been very feeble for some time and could not enter or leave an auto without help. Miss Elliott said that although she does not know her half-brother's exact age, she is certain he is older than 79, probably 81 or 82. He had been a lifelong resident of the Mud Creek section and was highly regarded there. His first wife, Sultana Newsom Frasure, died, and his surviving children were born to his second marriage. These children are Miss Arizona Newsom, James, Truman, Robert, Rosina, Anna Mae Frasure, all of Craner, 2 half-brothers, Frank Hall of Whitesburg and Mac Hall, Charleston, West Virginia, and a half-sister, Miss Elliott of Harold, also survive. Funeral rites were conducted Sunday. The Reverend Bert Newsom, Andy Martin, J.B. Hamilton, and Jonah Isaacs officiating. Burial in the Ike Roberts Cemetery at Craner was directed by the Ryan Funeral Home. September the 7th, 1948. Among the indictments returned by the grand jury during its last 3 days of work last week were true murder bills against Bertie Hall and Ozzie Smothers. The indictment charged Hall with killing John Frasure on Mud Creek by striking, beating, and stomping. March the 3rd, 1949. Court order moves Hall. Man facing murder trial docked for April term taken to Clark County. Bert T. Hall, who is under indictment for the murder of John Frasure, aged Mud Creek man, was transferred Tuesday on an order of Circuit Judge E.P. Hill, Jr. from the county jail here to the Clark County Jail at Winchester for safekeeping. Jail attendants said they knew no definite reason for the transfer. They said, however, that Hall had on occasion been abusive of other prisoners. The accused man, whose trial is scheduled here next month, was taken to Winchester by Deputy Sheriffs Tom Dingus and Harold. February 16th, 1950. Bertie Hall trial begins. From 126, Verman summoned a jury panel had been formed at noonday adjournment of Circuit Court Wednesday for the trial of Bertie Hall, who is charged with the murder of 79-year-old John Frasure of Craner in 1948. Hearing of testimony began Wednesday afternoon, and a verdict is expected tonight or early Friday. Hall, who is accused of beating and kicking Frasure so severely at the Frasure home on Mud Creek that the aged man died 2 days later at the Beaver Valley Hospital in Martin. He is on trial because he refused to accept a life pen term. At a previous court session, his attorney entered for him a guilty plea with the understanding that a life sentence would be the maximum penalty. Next day, Hall declared he himself had not made the guilty plea or accepted the penalty. The jury was impaneled after its members had stated they would impose the death penalty if the evidence warrants it. Death of Frasure, it was testified at the examining trial here, resulted from trouble arising between him and Hall over Hall's attention to Frasure's 16-year-old daughter, Rosina. Chest injuries were given as the direct cause of death. February 23rd, 1950. 15-year term handed Hall, charged with fatally beating aged man while holding family prisoner. The 15-year pen term given Bertie Hall Friday in the death of 79-year-old John Frasure of Mud Creek probably ended the Floyd Circuit Court's murder trials for the current term, which ends next week. Hall's sentence came at the hands of a Floyd jury, which was reported in the early balloting as polling 7 votes for a life sentence. The Commonwealth offered the testimony of the victim's 16-year-old daughter, Rosina, and 3 younger children of the family to the effect that Hall knocked Frasure to the floor of his home, beat and kicked him, and virtually held them prisoners in the home during the day of the attack until he and another man took Frasure by auto to a Martin hospital, which was the Beaver Valley Hospital. Only the defendant's testimony contradicted the story told by the 4 children of Frasure, but several witnesses told of Rosina hurling a bottle at her father on the afternoon preceding his fatal injury and striking him on the head. Testimony also was introduced claiming that Rosina, who was Hall's sweetheart, had threatened to put lye in her father's coffee. The fatal altercation arose, it was claimed, over Hall's attention to Rosina Frasure. At an earlier court term, Hall's attorney entered a plea of guilty, seeking an agreed verdict of life imprisonment. Hall, next day, declared he had made no such plea and demanded a trial. For several months he was held in the Clark County Jail at Winchester for safekeeping. In another article in the Floyd County Times, which is named, it's an opinion article, This Town, That World, and it's an opinion. So, but I agree with this opinion, and I'm going to read it to you. It's 15 years worth of murder. News having deliberated with 11 fathers on the question of a man's guilt or innocence of murder, I admit, in poor position to pass judgment on the verdicts of others, but I feel fully qualified to ask questions. I would like to ask a question about the verdict in this case of Bertie Hall, who was given a 15-year pen term last Friday for the murder of 79-year-old John Frasure. It is this: if Bertie Hall beat and kicked that aged man so badly that he died of his injuries, how could 12 good men and true consider him guilty of a mere manslaughter charge and send him to prison for only 15 years, which in this state means 6 or 7 years actual time spent as a convict? Or, if the jury felt that he did not stand guilty as charged, how could it give a half-hearted guilty verdict? It strikes me that when a 79-year-old man is beaten and kicked and taken hours later to a hospital with at least some degree of secrecy and left there to die, somebody is guilty of bloody murder. Not 15 years worth of murder either. Not too long ago, an attorney for this same defendant rose in court and entered a plea of guilty for his client and accepted a life term by agreement. After that, the defendant claimed the right of trial, which he should have had, and how right he was. Okay, let's go to page 6. I do not presume to say this young man Hall murdered John Frasure, a man whose 79 years bore heavily on him, probably more heavily than on the ordinary man of like age. But I think, unless I were mesmerized or otherwise deprived of my reasoning powers, I would have condemned or absolved him, and have done with it, one way or the other, declared him guilty of darkest murder or completely innocent. And if I had written a verdict of not guilty, I should have respectfully petitioned the court to start an investigation to determine who did wantonly and brutally kill the old man. On the 1900 census of precinct number 6, June the 1st, it shows John Frasure as the head of household, and his birthday is listed as 1870, and his first wife, Sultani, her birth date is listed as 1869, and his occupation is shown as a salesman. Both birthplaces for both people, his wife and him, shows Kentucky. In the 1940 census, listed as April the 26th, John Frasure is listed as head of household, age as 70. His occupation is listed as merchant, general retail store, and after the death of his first wife, Sultani, it shows his wife as being Polly, and her age is given as 25. And daughter Arizona is listed, Roseanne, James, Anna Mae, and Truman are listed in his household. Magistrate District 4, County Floyd, John Frasure, birth 1868, death 1948, aged 79 or 80, burial in the Ike Roberts Cemetery located at Grethel in Floyd County, Kentucky. It reads on his headstone, "Rest in peace, Dad. Your son, Robert."